all your strength. This is the first commandment. And the second, like it, is this. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. Mark 12:30 through 31, right? Okay, every day they had the opportunity to recite those verses together, and it was great. I loved being able to see them, all of those Vacation Bible Schoolers, the 20 or so, 20 or 25 that we had here today, who were able to recite and hear again and have that truth being planted in them. The first part of that commandment, nobody seems to ever have a problem. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. But Jesus didn't leave it there. The second, like it, is this. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Love your neighbor is one of those phrases that we Christians like to kick around. We like to use that phrase in the church. But it seems that sometimes we have a hard time putting into practice what Jesus is talking about here in these verses. To love in the way that Jesus is talking about, to love someone else in this way, is to put the needs and the desires of another person in front of our own needs and our own desires. Now, we expect certain spiritual experts. We expect Mother Teresa to love this way. We expect the preacher to live this way, these spiritual experts. But surely, God doesn't expect all of us to love others the way that He loves us. After all, you're probably thinking this, I'm pretty lovable. But there are a lot of seriously unlovable people out there. Surely God isn't talking about those people as well. But He is. Jesus never gives us a way to justify our lack of love for somebody else. He never gives us an excuse. If we are a faithful follower of Jesus, we are expected to love other people the way that we would want to be loved, with no excuses allowed. No excuses for, well, you don't understand. You don't understand that He doesn't take care of His property the way that I want Him to take care of His property. You don't understand that, He doesn't treat His kids the way that I treat my kids. You don't understand that He mows too far over the property line, or not far enough over the property line. Surely God doesn't want me to love that guy. And that guy who drives the way that he drives? Ooh, I think God just stepped on my toes. One of the best examples of this kind of God-focused love that Jesus calls all of us to demonstrate to one another comes from the Old Testament book of 2 Samuel. I want you to turn there with me this morning. We're going to be in 2 Samuel chapter 9. The story comes out of the life of David. Now, this past week, Vacation Bible School wasn't just for the youngest of the kids among us. We also had our older kids. And the older kids and I had an opportunity to get together and to take a look into the life of David. We had 5 different things that we looked at. We had five different events in the life of David that we looked at throughout the week. And unfortunately, one of those we didn't get to look at together, so I wanted to share that event with everyone, with all of us together this morning. And that's what we find here in 2 Samuel chapter 9. And David is known for many things. But most of us would not think of God-centered love when we think about David. We might think about strong warrior. We might think of shepherd, example of a leader by being a shepherd. We might think of someone who really messed up with his kids at different times. But God-centered love doesn't usually come out as one of the first things we think about. But maybe it should. After all, it was David's love for God that compelled him to go up against Goliath, as Goliath was spewing out all of these curses against the God of Israel. It was David's love for God and for God's character that compelled him to go up and fight against this giant when no one else would. And it was David's God-centered love for Saul that led David to respect the office of the king and God's anointed, where David refused to raise his hand against God's anointed king, even though Saul had plotted the murder of David, even though Saul had tried to carry that murder out himself at least twice, and then hired people to come in and to murder David in his sleep before. All of these things, David never raised a hand against Saul because it was God-centered love for David directed towards Saul. Of all the examples of God-centered love that we find in David's life story, it's the story of his friendship, though, with Saul's son Jonathan that really kind of stands at the forefront of my mind. I know I've said 2 Samuel chapter 9. We're getting cold. In 1 Samuel 18, we're told that Jonathan and David made a promise to each other. That no matter what happened in the future, no matter if David was killed and Jonathan became king, or Jonathan was killed and David ended up becoming king, no matter what happened between Saul and David, no matter what happened in the future, the families of these two friends would be cared for by the other person. They made a vow to each other. These guys were best friends. And they made a vow to one another that no matter what happened, no matter what the future held, we will take care of each other's families. After David becomes king and there's a time of peace in Israel, then David remembers this pledge, this promise that he made with his friend Jonathan. And that's where we pick up the story in 2 Samuel chapter 9. Start in verse 1. Now David said, "Is there still anyone who is left of the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" And there was a servant in the house of Saul whose name was Ziba. So when they had called Ziba into David's presence, the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" And Ziba said, "At your service." And the king said, "Is there not still someone of the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God?" And Ziba said to the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan who is lame in his feet." The king said to him, "Where is he?" And Ziba said to the king, "Indeed, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, in Lodabar." Then King David sent and brought him out of the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lodabar. Now when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, had come to David, he fell on his face and prostrated himself. And David said, "Mephibosheth?" And he answered, "Here is your servant." So David said to him, "Do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan your father's sake, and I will restore to you all the land of Saul your grandfather, and you shall eat bread at my table continually." Then he bowed himself and said, "What is your servant, that you should look upon such a dead dog as I?" And the king called to Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, "I have given to your master's son all that belonged to Saul and to all his house. You therefore and your sons and your servants shall work the land for him. You shall bring in the harvest that your master's son may have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's son, shall eat bread at my table always." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, "According to all that my lord the king has commanded his servant, so will your servant do. As for Mephibosheth, said the king, he shall eat at my table like one of the king's sons." Now, Mephibosheth is probably a name that you're not all that familiar with. Maybe you've read this story before. Maybe you remember when I preached from this several years ago. But Mephibosheth is not one of those names that we normally talk about. He only appears in the David story in the Old Testament, and he only appears there 3 times. Out of all the other characters, out of all the other people who were there, Mephibosheth only shows up 3 times. The first time is right after the death of Saul and Jonathan, and we're told that the royal family is fleeing from the palace because they have heard the news about the king's death. And we can't blame them for their fear. After all, one of the things the Philistines would do after they had killed the king was to then go and find the king's family, remove any and all threats that might rise up against them. And so they had the very real threat of the Philistines coming in and killing them all. And so they vacated the royal palace and they ran. But there was also the imagined fear from David and his band of followers. After all, Saul had made it a priority to pursue David even unto death. And David had been fleeing for his life from Saul for quite some time. So maybe they imagined that this was the opportunity that David was going to take to come in and to wipe them all out. And so they grabbed everything they could. Imagine if you can, just for a moment, put yourself in their place. You're running around the house and you're looking for whatever it is that you need. You're grabbing those heirlooms that you want to hold on to, that you want to pass along to the next generation. You're grabbing enough clothes to get you through whatever kind of journey you might have to take. You're digging through drawers. Where did I put that extra cash that I've been holding on to just in case of an emergency? Where are all these things? And in all of this confusion and all of this chaos, Jonathan's young son, who was 4 years old at the time, got dropped. Somehow. Dropped, stepped on, something happened, and both of his ankles were broken. I picked him up and carried him on, and then throughout this long and arduous journey that they made away from the king's palace and into this place of safety, they finally found a place where they could live, and that was here, in this place, Lodabar, this little bitty community, so far away, so far removed from where they had lived before. As Mephibosheth's ankles healed as he grew up, there was a problem with the way that the bones knit together. He was crippled in his feet. He bore the scars for the rest of his life of that tragedy that happened as they were trying to run away, as they were trying to escape. I have to imagine, though, that there's more than an injury to his ankles that crippled Mephibosheth, because that wasn't the name that he was given at his birth. I don't remember off the top of my head, and I was not smart enough to write it in my notes what that name was. But Mephibosheth is the name in Hebrew that talks about bearing the pain. And that's not normally something that you would want to hang up, not a name you would hang upon your child. A name you bearing the pain. No. This was a name that was given to him by those who cared for him. I know many people today, some of them personally, some of them through the stories that I've heard them tell, who have problems in their bodies, some sort of physical problem, but they have very healthy outlooks on life. It's not just having a physical problem that can cause you to have a problem in your spirit or to cause you to have a bad outlook on life. Worse than these injuries that he had suffered, it seems that the people around Mephibosheth crippled his spirit as well. He had to have grown up hearing, it should be you up there on that throne. David has stolen what your grandfather would want you to have. Here we are, living it out in Lodabar, when David is enjoying the life of luxury in a palace in Jerusalem. While we don't have any firm scriptural evidence that these things happened, it's easy for us to imagine that words like these were spoken often around this young boy. And after a while, our lives start to reflect what other people are telling us about ourselves. So when David's men showed up in Lodabar, there could only be one conclusion from Mephibosheth and from his family, and probably even from Ziba before in the temple, in the palace rather, that David was looking for some way to exterminate the last of Saul's lineage. Mephibosheth had to have thought, I've been found. Now I'm going to be carried away, and I'm going to be publicly executed. After all, that's the way Saul would have done things. So why would David do things any different? But what Mephibosheth found when he was brought into David's presence was not murder, it was not threats, it was love. Look again at how David receives this young man there in verse 6. When Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, had come to David, he fell on his face and he prostrated himself. He is in fear for his life. He is laying down at David's feet and he is saying, here I am. Here I am. Have mercy on me. Have mercy on me. David speaks one word to him that we're told here. And he asks his name, and I love how they have it here. He asks it as a question. Mephibosheth? I love that. Have you ever met the children of someone that you knew from years ago? And you see in the face of that child, that friend who you knew 20, 30 years ago. Absolutely. Most of us have. We look at someone and we go, oh my word. He's a little copy of my friend that I knew from years ago. We see that. We see that in the children. We see it in the grandchildren of our friends and of our family members. I can't help but look at Jonah Cheek and see a little Mark. I don't know. It's just Mark. He'll get me for that later. It's okay. There's a part of me that thinks that when Mephibosheth came into David's room there, for a moment, David's offspring, and he had to ask himself, Mephibosheth, or John? Mephibosheth said, classic response, here's your servant. After all, what do you say to the man who's literally holding the power of life and death over you? Whatever you want, here I am. And then David spoke those next words in verse 7, those words that are so biblical and so full of power and love. Do not fear. What did the angel say to the shepherds the night that all of heaven was opened up and the birth of the Messiah was announced? Do not fear. What did the angel say to Mary? Do not fear. What did God say through the burning bush to Moses? We sang the song, started off our service with it this morning. You're standing on holy ground. It comes right out of that passage there in the book of Exodus. What did God say through the burning bush to Moses? Do not fear. David says those words. Words of love, words of power. Do not fear. I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan your father's sake. I will restore to you all the land of Saul your grandfather. You shall eat bread at my table continually. This boy who had nothing, this boy who grew up with nothing except for all of the fear, all of the anxiety, all of the what could have beens that were constantly heaped upon him, suddenly is having it all given back. Everything that had been taken away. Were his feet still bad? Were his ankles still broken? Was he still a cripple? Yes. But something started to change inside of him, much deeper than just the broken ankles. He was experiencing the power of what love can do. David calls him by name. David remembers the love that he had for his friend Jonathan, Mephibosheth's dad. David restores to Mephibosheth all that had been taken away from him and gives him a place of honor at the royal table. This is what God's love does in our life. When we turn to him, he calls us by our name because he knows us better than we know ourselves. He lavishes his love upon us by forgiving our sins, by cleansing us from sin, by providing his daily grace to keep us from sinning. God restores to us a relationship with himself through faith in Jesus. This is what God's love looks like in our life. This is a kind of love that can truly change a person from the inside out for the better. And we get to see the very last time that Mephibosheth shows up in the David story, how that love has changed this young man. In 2 Samuel 19, there's been an attempt by David's oldest son to overthrow David's kingly rule. David's army has won the day. And even though David had to flee the palace, he's now returning. Upon returning, he finds Mephibosheth waiting for him. Now, this is probably a bit of a surprise to David because David had been told a lie. David had been told upon his return into the area, he had been told that Mephibosheth wasn't there anymore. Because Mephibosheth was part of this whole uprising. He had sought to overthrow your kingdom, is what Ziba, this man who had been given to Mephibosheth as a servant, he wanted to overthrow your kingdom because he wanted what had been his grandfather's. First, David believed this lie. And I'm sure it broke his heart. After all I've given that boy. And now this. But when he gets back to the palace, he finds that Mephibosheth is there waiting for him. And he sees Mephibosheth standing there. The scripture tells us very clearly. He says his beard was untrimmed, his face was unwashed, his clothing was dirty, his feet had not been cared for. And David walks in and he sees this, and he says, "Where have you been?" And he said, "I've been here waiting for your return." David said, "I thought that you were part of something else." And Mephibosheth said, "Why would I? Why would I seek to do harm to the one who has shown me such kindness?" You see, that's what love does. It changes us. It changes us. David had expected to find Mephibosheth gone, but he finds him there in the palace, not looking like he's preparing himself for a royal coronation, but looking like a friend who's been worried sick about a loved one. The love that David had shown to Mephibosheth changed this man's attitude. That's what love does. Instead of hiding behind a crippled spirit, instead of operating from a poisoned outlook on life, Mephibosheth has become a friend to the one who showed God's love to him. David got to be an instrument of God's love to Jonathan's son, and that love changed a tragic figure into a living example of God's grace. As followers of Jesus, we are called to love one another unselfishly and in a way that helps them understand more about God. The love that we are called to share with others can change a person's demeanor, his outlook on life, as God's love through us restores dignity in their life. This is the way that we get to be God's love to those around us. As we are abiding with God every day, He is shaping us to become a useful tool in His hands, through which His holy love can be extended through us to everyone that we encounter. Love can see through what a person has been in order to see what a person has the potential to be. God's love has done that very thing for each one of us who are following Jesus today. And now God desires each of us to become examples of His love, to be His love to every person we meet. And with His daily help, with the grace that He provides as we are walking with Him every single day, that we can be up to the challenge that God has laid before us of being His love to the world that we encounter. As we close the service this morning, as we sing our final song together, I would certainly invite you. If you would like to come to these altars and pray, I invite you to do that. We have one still left with school supplies, but we still have one available. If you'd like to come and pray this morning, I'd be happy to come and pray with you, no matter what it's about.